Good afternoon. As Dr. Gorman said, I'm Mark Grabau from IBM. Beth Risco is my co-author in this. She sends her regrets. It was her 25th wedding anniversary, and she had scheduled that before we understood that we were semi-finalists, so she sends her regrets. Westfield Group, headquartered there in Westfield Center, Ohio, just south of Cleveland, was founded in 1848. They provide banking for businesses as well as individuals, but primarily they're a $1.5 billion property and casualty multi-line insurer. They're a financially solid company. They are a top 50 United States P&C company, and they sell their products through 1,100 independent agencies and across 21 states. And you can see the footprint and the distribution of business with personal lines, so home and auto policies making up the largest percentage of their business. So Westfield's analytics journey began just prior to 2006, where they launched a BAI program, and the goal of that program was to create an enterprise data warehouse. Then what they did for the next 3 years was rolled out agency reporting that they had never had before, which then changed the way the agencies were managed. So prior to an agent's interface doing a site visit, they would be required to review the BI reports so that they could have an intelligent conversation with the agency while they were there. And then most recently, we're looking at agency productivity, which is one of the components that I'll be talking to you about today, as well as developing a new agency segmentation, which had primarily been based on anecdotal evidence or just simply a sort of written premium over time, and creating only two tiers of agencies. So what they would consider elite, which were about 30 to 50 agencies out of the 1,100, and then with the balance being just considered a standard agency. So what's the business problem? Well, because they're selling their products through an independent agency network, not only is Westfield competing for market share within that geography, they're having to do so by competing for share within that independent agency. Now, this is different than, for say, a Geico, who you can go directly to, and they're not reliant on that independent agency network, which would be considered a direct channel. It's different than a State Farm, who has a captive agent. So if you go into a State Farm agency, you're only going to be sold State Farm products. You're not going to be sold a Westfield product. And then our other scenarios are an independent agency that isn't selling any Westfield products whatsoever. This would be considered a prospect for Westfield, or perhaps someone they've culled from their agency fleet. The ones we're more interested in are those that are selling some portion of Westfield products right now as part of what they produce within that agency, and even better yet, those agencies that are dedicated and pretty much only sell Westfield products. Now, in addition to that, because the insurer becomes more reliant on the independent agent than the independent agent really is on them, because the independent agent is happy to sell products, and they will do it with multiple carriers. So insurers fail to maximize what they can get out of that independent agency network for several reasons. They're completely unable to exploit connections between what's happened in the past, what's going on right now, and what they should be able to expect in the future. They don't have a complete understanding of the resources that agency has at its disposal within their market, such as how many homeowners are there that they could potentially sell homeowner policies to. They have inconsistent decision-making for appointing and culling agencies, and the reason for that is a lot of times those are simply based on legacy relationships between the agent's interface at the company and someone specifically at that agency. And a lot of times just on anecdotal evidence of performance versus something that is easily measured, such as sales or loss ratio. And then that leads us to a lack of understanding of what level of performance should we be able to expect from this agency. They have peers in similar markets producing a lot more. They had no idea how to quantify that shortfall, and therefore are increasingly challenged with using analytics to have a strategy to manage and operate their independent agent network. So our analytics solution, why is this innovative? Well, in terms of uniqueness and creativity, we started with prescriptive analytics. This is to the best of our knowledge, based on an extensive literature search, a first-of-its-kind application of the data envelopment analysis within insurance. But we didn't stop there. We took those decision-making units, those independent agencies that end up on the efficient frontier, and hand those off to a predictive model so that we can prospect and identify other agencies that we would expect to perform like our most productive agencies today based on that data envelopment analysis. We're also applying collaborative filtering to a business operating unit versus, say, a retail item on Amazon or another movie on Netflix. And then finally, our market inclusion methodology. We've had several different varieties of that, and I believe this is what has precluded people from doing something like this in the past. They had no way, doing data envelopment analysis for insurance agencies, they had no way to quantify what their inputs were, what resources they had at their disposal to produce written premium for an insurer. Our submission spans all three dimensions of analytics in one holistic process, none of them operating in isolation. They feed each other, so they're integrated. And the value, because of one of the outputs from the data envelopment analysis is we can identify the shortfall that an agency not on the efficient frontier is exhibiting, and then based on what the fleet is doing today, how many more millions of dollars should we be able to expect from those agencies that are currently in the fleet? And we are measuring that at well over $100 million right now. And then finally, we've received successful adaptation from the Westfield Agency Distribution Segmentation Team that's coming up with that new way to segment independent agencies, moving away from just elite and standard to something much more granular and refined. So this is a four-step process. We start with our prepare process where we're going to take data from disparate data sources and put it all together. And they output from this are consumable data sets that we'll then use in our prescribe and our predict process. Our analytic approach in our prescribe process is to use data envelopment analysis to evaluate the current agencies. Who's doing more with less, who's simply stepping over the hurdle, and who are our most efficient and most productive agencies. We then take those that are the most efficient and hand those off to our predict process so that we can then take third-party data that we have not only on the agencies that are currently in the fleet, but any other agency in the United States. And there are over 300,000 independent agencies in the United States, not just in the 21 states that Westfield operates in, but nationwide. So how can we take, so that third-party data then bridges the gap that we currently have to go from what we know with certainty about the agencies today to what we can expect from those prospects in the future. We're also using collaborative filtering then to give the decision maker some other measure of, hey, this agency is very similar to these other 5 agencies you currently have relationships with and exposure to in your fleet today, and here's how similar they are to give them a better understanding then of how well that agency will fit with the current fleet if they were to be appointed. And then all of that, all the data prep from our prepare process as well as the data envelopment analysis from the prescribe and the predictive analytics outputs from the collaborative filter and the logistic regression feed the present process to enable fact-based decision making. So in more detail now on each of those processes, so they had all this data, but what can we do with it? We had third-party data that had been purchased on attributes of agencies as well as prospects within the footprint. We had information on our agencies. Where are they located? What policies have they sold? Where are those policies located? Within those geographies, how many people rent houses versus own them? How many autos are there that could potentially be insured? And how much income does that market have such that an individual will be able to purchase a home or an auto policy? And so we're going to take all that data then and cleanse it and prepare it based on various keys, whether that's the agency's code or the FIPS code of the county in which they're located or that policy is located in. We're going to determine the market for each area, but then while doing that, we're simultaneously able to do some geospatial analytics to determine what's their primary county, what is their market share within that primary county within Westfield agencies. For all of the counties in their market, how much of that market share do they have? And then plot that as well, giving Westfield, for the first time, a visual on each individual agency's market and market size. Outputs from that then, we're going to have an output data set for our prescribe process, which are going to be our inputs as well as our outputs for our data envelopment analysis. And then we're also going to have the independent variables for our predict process as well. the prescribed process providing the dependent variable that we'll need, which is that efficiency score to use as the dependent variable in our logistic regression. Now, in our prescribed process, so we have all these different measures. We have what auto premium is new business, what's renewal business, what home premium is new business versus renewal business. How do we evaluate multiple metrics simultaneously, also taking into account what they had at their disposal to create those outputs? So our performance are those 4 different versions of written premium, and the resources they have at their disposal then are how many autos, how many homeowners and renters we had, the household income, as well as how many agents at that agency are appointed to sell, licensed to sell then Westfield products. So our mathematical approach here is to use data envelopment analysis in order to be able to do that. And what we identify then is the agencies that end up using an output orientation for our data envelopment analysis. Which agencies end up on our efficient frontier? Those will then get scraped off and handed off to our predict process. Those are the model agencies that we want to try to identify and ferret out of our prospect pool. In addition to that, we also, as part of that output, we can determine whether or not they're operating in an increasing, decreasing, or constant returns to scale. And then for those agencies that aren't on the efficient frontier, well, how much is their shortfall in each product type? Now, in our predict process, so we have this distribution network. How can we make it bigger? We have underperforming agencies that we're going to call. How do we identify those that we are going to call, but then even more importantly, backfill for those after we've done that? So our independent variables are from that third-party data source that we have then on both the agencies that are currently in the fleet, out of the 1,100, as well as then agencies that are the prospects within the footprint as well. And our dependent variable for our logistic regression is 1 if they end up on the efficient frontier and 0 if they're not. So our approach here for 1, we want to predict their productivity propensity, the likelihood, the propensity to be on the efficient frontier, but then we're also going to use an item-based collaborative filter in order to identify agencies that are similar to this prospect. We'll also use that collaborative filter to come up with an estimate for what we expect their written premium to be as well. So our outputs here, we have our productivity propensity, similar agencies, as well as similarity scores. So when you go to Amazon and you see, hey, you read this book, or you rated this book, you bought this book, you might also like this one. In addition to, just like they see today that, well, for those people that did read that, they gave it 4.5 stars. We're also going to display the similarity score, that a value between 0 and 1, that then allows the decision maker to see, okay, these are the agencies that are most like this prospect that I'm considering. Well, how much are they alike? Is it something high, or is it a very low score, giving them a confidence in whether or not they would want to appoint this agency. In addition to using the collaborative filter to predict written premium, we're also going to predict the number of policies then that agency would produce if appointed. Now, and then all of that funnels into then our present process. So we have we've done all this advanced analytics work. We have all this data that we've really merged together for the first time at Westfield. Now, how can we take all that, put it in one display so that the decision maker can make an informed decision? That is what our present process does, both in terms of tabular format as well as mapping that. In addition to the things that were either inputs or outputs from each of the other previous processes, we're also going to display their performance over an extended period of time so they can see their compound annual growth rate, but also how well did they just do in the previous year. So are they doing well consistently, or did they just have one good year? And we're using one calendar year then as the measure for output for our data envelopment analysis. And this is when then we get to that other one of the 3 analytic approaches. We have our descriptive statistics that we're going to display that we've calculated, as well as giving them a visualization rather than just simply tabular information that they have to interpret. So this is an example then of that present process for an agency that's currently in the fleet. So we have descriptive statistics based on the third-party data and other internal things. So where are they located? How many agents do they have appointed with Westfield to sell products? From the third-party data then, what other interesting things are there about what's the population that the third party considers is their market? What is their total sales? So not just for Westfield, but for other insurers that they sell for as well. How large is their presence within that market? And do they have a web page? It actually ends up being significant in our predictive models. So do they have a presence there that the consumer can get to 24/7 versus having to see the box that the agency's in or something else? How long have they been in business? What kind of relationships do they have in that community with the people that are near and around them? And as I mentioned, we have our 2011 performance, as well as the performance over that 4-year window to give them an idea for how well they've been performing over an extended period of time. So the loss, this would be a bad loss ratio for an insurer to have something for home and auto anyway, to have something approaching 73%. Their growth is outstanding, but it looks like they're starting to level off. A loss ratio that's more reasonable, and still having some significant growth. Now, because we put all that data together and had to figure out what was their primary county and what counties are in their markets, we can then also determine what primary county are they in, how many other agencies are in that same county, what percent of the market do they have in that county, and then what percent of the market do they have in all the counties that we have now assigned to them as their market. And then display that information graphically. So here we can see that this agency with that key has 3 counties that they operate in Michigan. And then finally, the outputs from the Data Envelopment Analysis. So a productivity score here with an output orientation of 1 is the best. And then they have constant returns to scale, and because they're on the efficiency frontier, they're also not exhibiting any auto or home written premium shortfall. If that was someone that wasn't on the efficient frontier, what would be displayed to the user would be a value less than 1. The returns to scale would be one of those other 3, and then we would have some value for either home or auto or both in written premium shortfall. Now, on the prospect side, it's very similar in terms of what we display for them. Up here, same information we had on the third-party data sources. Now, we don't really know, so we know that the population within that market area that they operate in is estimated to be in that range, but we don't know what counties that all include. So we're just then displaying for the decision maker which county are they currently located in, so they just have a feel for that. Now, then our logistic regression estimates what their productivity propensity is going to be, and then we had 196 prospects. How does that productivity propensity rank with the prospects that were under consideration here within the model? Then the collaborative filter contributes the 5 agencies that were the most similar, their similarity score, to give them that just kind of subjective view then of, hey, do we feel good about these 5 agencies or not so much? Now, again, great loss ratios here, not so much here, but pretty good there. So they do potentially have the risk to have mixed messages there. But then we also give them an estimate then for how much written premium and the number of policies we would expect over a calendar year if we were to appoint this agency. So again, it's one holistic process. We take all the data from the disparate data sources, hand it off to our prescribed process, which uses linear programming, data envelopment analysis, to identify those agencies that are doing the most with the resources that they have. We then use those as the targets in our predict process so that we can prospect for new agencies that we know nothing about other than the third-party information that we have on that agency right now. And then hand all of that off to our present process so that the decision maker can consume it in a digestible form. Now, we presented this a few weeks ago to the two leads of the team that's performing the agency segmentation, and these are some of the quotes that they had at that meeting. The key one, in hindsight, was this. It was really the culmination of everything getting put together and put in the present process. Prior to that, we had simply given them a tabular list of agencies, just ranked based on their score from 1 on all the way down, and that was it. And so they would just kind of look at that and then, oh, that's nice, and throw it away. Now they have something they can interact with. They select an agency that they want to look at. They see the market displayed in a map, and they see a lot of other additional information that they are interested in. And so that leads us then to our next steps, where that agency segmentation team did a survey to determine whether or not that a prospective agency would fit within the Westfield culture, as well as look at agencies that were currently in the fleet. Were these good fits? So it was kind of subjective, and they put their own type of model around the survey that they took. And it was things like, do you have a perpetuation plan? Do you have a business plan? And if you had one or both of those, you got so many points. And then they ranked their agencies based on that. That team now wants to take that information and integrate it in with the iAPP that we've presented here today. What that'll allow us to do is to do the deep dive in the middle agencies, because there was agreement on who our top agencies were, who the bottom agencies were, but when we put the two together, you could see that there was a disconnect then between whether or not even though an agency might be a good fit, their productivity was very low, and we saw a spike in what we would have expected to be a nice, smooth, downward sloping curve. So that analysis then on those middle agencies is where our non-productive agencies are hiding. That's one of our next steps then, is to do a deeper dive there to determine which of those agencies are going to get culled here in the next few months. I mentioned our county inclusion threshold. Right now we look at what's their primary county, and then any other county that we're going to include within their market is based on them having a percent of their primary county's business in those satellite counties as well. So one of our other approach was to take any county that they had business in, as well as any adjacent county, and said that was their market. That ended up penalizing that agency too much, because it was incorporating way too many inputs that they would never touch, because they just wouldn't branch out a lot further. And as you saw, the one agency that was performing very well, nearly $1 million in written premium, only operated in 3 counties. And then continuous improvement. So we're coming up on the end of a calendar year. By the second week in January, we'll have all of the results from 2012, rerun the analysis to identify, and we will have culled a large number of agencies based on the agency segmentation team's analysis, so we will have a different pool of competitors then for the data envelopment analysis to evaluate. Each of the judges has the deck in a bound copy. In the back of that then are the letters of impact from the president of Westfield Insurance, as well as the IBM partner. Does anybody have any questions?